did follow Dan Brown, the transgender woman, about a week ago. Wonderful. She was
Congratulations.
yeah,
That's great. Total repudiation.
she's 40 years younger than her. She's 33 and he's 73. He must like.
Right about it.
Yeah.
It's just
What color are your XLR cables? I haven't, but I know someone who got but it wasn't really a big deal. He's doing good.
Thank you very much. Later on this morning, Congressman Brian Higgins from Buffalo, New York, he's going to be offering an amendment, I think, that is going to test the theory that has been put forward by the head of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, who has promised that if their tax proposal passes as is, which as you can see today based upon the commentary of the Republican leadership, it is likely to be changed from the time it moves out of this committee today or tomorrow. But Congressman Higgins is going to offer the following amendment, which I believe can be scrutinized by the Census Bureau or the Department of Labor or the Department of Commerce, and it goes like this. The President's chairman of the Board of Chief Economic Advisors has said that he guarantees a $4,000 increase in the ability of wage growth for the average American. And recall that what they have defined the average American as, or American family, as being the following. Family of four at $59,000 a year. So that means their income would go to $63,000 based upon the proposal that the administration has offered. Now, you can't find a mainstream economist that will accept that idea. So Mr. Higgins is going to offer an amendment suggesting that if they don't meet that threshold that they have promised to the American people, that in fact the tax cut that emphasizes repeal of the estate tax and emphasizes repeal of the alternative minimum tax based on a middle class argument, there's no connection. So Mr. Higgins is suggesting simply the following, that if that doesn't go into effect, then we will put aside the proposal that they have in the tax bill that they are likely to try to pass in the next few days. And with that, my counterpart on the Senate Finance Committee, and a good pal from the House days, Ron White.
Richie, thank you so much, and I'm going to be brief. In the last 18 hours, Senate Democrats told the administration and the president that tax reform can be bipartisan if you focus on the middle class. And that's what voters demanded last night. Now, I hope that the White House finally gets that message, because it was certainly sent loud and clear by Senate Democrats and voters. But if instead they insist on the same old myth of trickle-down tax cuts, we believe they ought to be willing to stand by it. So here's what we say. Put your corporate tax handout where your mouth is. And we're going to make sure that the American people, the middle class, are the ones that get the tax relief. The reality is, corporations right now are awash in capital. They have enormous cash hoards on hand. And we want to make it clear that when the consumer, when the middle class is driving 70% of the economic activity in our country, they ought to be the focus. The President said again yesterday when he talked with us that he didn't think he ought to be getting tax relief. Well, this particular amendment outlined by my colleague will be pursuing the same idea in the Senate, ensures that the relief does go to the middle class and not to a president who says he doesn't want it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here with two champions for America's working families. The ranking member, we call him vice chair in the Senate, Ron Wyden. We take pride in his leadership there as he was a former member of the House, and our ranking member on the House side, Richie Neal. And I rise in support of, in our House, the Higgins Amendment, which will hold the Republicans accountable for their words. But first, let me say we will shortly be joined by the great Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, and he and I both view what is happening in these rooms not as tax reform, not as tax cuts, but a tax scam. Right now, President Trump is in China with an entourage of corporate CEOs. While he's cutting deals over there for corporate America, maybe, Republicans in Congress are writing a tax bill that gives tax breaks to corporate America to send jobs overseas. It's just not right. It's just not right. While the Republicans are saying, I just acknowledged you in great praise, did I not, for the distinguished leader from the Senate? While the Republicans are, again, working on their tax scam, again, which is not reform, which not is a tax cut for many millions of Americans, they are trying to sell it as a bill of goods that is good for the middle class. While they increase taxes on millions of American families across the country, while they have tax breaks for corporate America to ship jobs overseas, they're trying to tell middle America that if they give corporate America a $1.5 trillion tax cut, it's going to be good for them. Okay, if that's what they think, then they should accept the amendment that is being put forth in the House by the House and Senate Democrats, which, let me just say completely, challenges them to accept the accountability amendment, no wage growth for workers, no corporate giveaways. And so we believe, as Senator Wyden said, that we can come together in a bipartisan way and write real tax reform that promotes growth, that creates good-paying jobs for all Americans, and reduces the deficit. Democrats are proposing a better deal, and that is what we would like to come together, real tax reform that starts with the middle class. And with that, I'm very pleased to yield to the distinguished Democratic leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and did I say, of New York State.
I would like to thank the distinguished Democratic leader of the House from the great state of California. A wonderful state. Not quite New York, but it's a very nice state. Anyway, we're here to tell Republicans, put your money where your mouth is. Every claim that they are making for this bill is getting whittled away. Speaker Ryan said every middle-class person will get a tax break. That is just totally false. He ought to retract it immediately. They're saying Donald Trump says this doesn't help the wealthy. Obviously it does. So all the claims they have made for this bill are belied by the bill itself. And that's why the day they published the bill was a turning point in this tax reform debate, heading down. Now, all they have left is one thing. They say, well, yeah, maybe it'll increase taxes on middle-class people. Yeah, maybe it'll give money to big corporations. But it'll create a lot of jobs. And they estimate that the average worker would get a 6.8% increase for a $4,000 increase when you cut corporate taxes. We say to the Republicans, put your money where your mouth is. And if your claims that these tax breaks for big corporations will create jobs don't pan out, take back the tax break. We don't believe it's real. Corporate America's flush with money already. The average tax rate for big corporations is 16%. One of the leading companies that wants this tax break is AT&T. Quiz. Who knows what AT&T's tax rate was over the last 10 years? Hint, single digits. AT&T's tax rate was 8%, and in that time, they laid off over 80,000 workers. And now, the corporate people who benefit are revealing their true colors, that they're not going to use this to employ workers, that they're going to do more stock buybacks, more dividends, which help the wealthy and help the CEOs bolster their stocks. And I'd like to read two quotes from two honest corporate executives. Robert Bradway, chairman and CEO of Amgen, a major pharmaceutical company.
In California.
It says based here in Washington, D.C., but they must have moved their headquarters to be closer to New York. Here's what he said, wherever he is. Obviously, we have a track record of returning significant capital to our shareholders. And to the extent that tax reform happens and provides greater flexibility for us, we'll take that into account into our capital allocation plans. As you know, from our track record over the last few years, we've been actively returning capital in the form of dividends and buybacks, and I expect to continue that. No jobs there. How about David Marburger, CFO at ConAgra, another Fortune 500 company? In terms of if there's a corporate tax reduction and there's more cash, we'll bounce back to our capital allocation. That means stock buybacks. That means dividends. Look, Democrats, we want to cut taxes for the middle class and small business. Their bill doesn't do it. It showers the wealthiest corporations, the wealthiest individuals with even more money, and the idea that they're going to use this to create jobs is fantasy put forward by right-wing think tanks and professors, paid for by people like the Koch brothers. And some of you actually swallow this junk. If you believe it, if you believe it'll create jobs, then no one should oppose our amendment, which says, you get all this money, you don't create jobs, give it back to the taxpayers, and we'll put it there for the middle class. Our amendment would snap back to the old corporate rate if corporate America fails to create the jobs that our Republican friends promise they will do. Questions? Casey.
Mr. Leader, Madam Leader, if you would mind answering this as well. Republicans lost badly across Virginia and in other local races last night. Is this the beginning of a Democratic wave?
Well, let me say this. The Republicans should look at the elections last night, and it should be a giant stop sign for their tax bill. Where did they get clobbered? In the suburbs. Where does the tax bill clobber middle class and upper middle class people? In the suburbs. Barbara Comstock, her district went overwhelmingly Democratic last night, and 49% of the taxpayers in her district take the state and local deduction at a cost of $13,562. But it wasn't just in Virginia. In New York, in 2010, we lost the county executives of our two biggest suburban counties, Westchester and Nassau, two of our three biggest counties. We won them back last night. The town of Hempstead, 800,000 people, the largest town in America, has been Republican for 100 years. For the first time, it elected a Democrat. So we are saying to our Republican colleagues, if you continue to try and eliminate the state and local deduction, you're going to kill suburban legislators who are already in trouble because the suburbs don't seem to like Donald Trump. So we say to our Republican friends on this tax bill, as Clint Eastwood said, you want to pass this tax bill? You want to hurt the suburbs? Make our day. Make our day. Nancy, from California.
I associate myself, of course, with the remarks of the distinguished leader from the Senate. Let me just say, from the standpoint of some issues, what was interesting to observe was that overwhelmingly the leading issue that people said they voted on was health care. And I think that the Republicans in Congress should take heed of that as they try once again to inject certain repeals into their tax bill. It was far and above, almost twice as much as the next issue, which was gun safety, and after that, taxes and then down the line. Of course, we always observe elections, and election is what happens that day. It's a great day for the Democrats. But as we go forward, we have to recognize that there were many good days before that. And the president coming out and saying that the reason his candidate for Governor Gillespie lost there is because he wasn't like Trump enough or something like that. Let them think that. I hope they continue to think that. Because if they go into the next races and say, oh, he wasn't enough like Trump, we'll have even bigger victories. Last night was historic in the numbers. Look at the numbers. Look at the women, the way the women voted. Look at the narrowing of the gap among blue-collar workers, a much smaller margin among seniors. So across the board, the electorate paid attention to what was happening. And what they see here coming out of this tax debate and what they saw on the health care debate was not in their interest or the interest of their families, and they voted accordingly, and they voted overwhelmingly Democratic, to the point where the state legislature may be in play, which is remarkable because they went into last night with a 46-vote majority in the state legislature.
Can you win back
And I would just say one more, one more thing here.
Can you win back the House next year, Madam Leader?
The door is certainly open for us. In '05, Right now, we had President Bush down to 38%. That's approximately where President Trump is now. That opens the door. That means we get the fresh recruits and they get the retirements. We get the 18, and the candidate is very important in the election. So
In 2005, I was head of the DSCC, and you could smell a wave coming. The results last night smell exactly the same way. Our Republican friends better look out.
Casey, I want to add one other point to your important question. As Senate Democrats were winning those huge victories last night, Democratic senators were telling the White House you could get 70 to 80 votes for a bipartisan tax reform bill if you put the focus on the middle class. So the question with respect to what you're interested in is, does the White House get that message? I don't think it could be clearer.
When you
Other
look
question,
at the election
yes.
results last night in the context of tax reform, and Senator Wyden, you talk about the call that the president had with Democrats yesterday. We have been told that this bill, whatever they report out here and pass in the House, is not going to be the final product. Do you think, though, for the House, but for the Senate, that they're going to rely on the Senate? Do you think that that is going to mitigate what they try to do because of the election results last night?
I'll just say, and then call Richie, in some cases, they're making it worse. Any of our House friends, some of my New York colleagues in the House said, oh, we'll have a compromise on state and local. The Senate is saying, no compromise, get rid of the whole thing. And because the Senate rules are tougher, that's what will happen. Anyone in the House who comes from a district that benefits from the state and local deduction ought to be very, very careful, because they're headed to eliminate the whole thing. The compromise is going to go the way of all flesh.
And you know exactly what they're being instructed by their leadership. Just take it out of here. We'll fix it in the Rules Committee. And I know what they're going to say on the Rules Committee. Oh, just pass it out of the House and the Senate will fix it when it comes over to the Senate side. There are a series of votes that they're going to have to cast to move this out of the House in the next 24 hours, including ending the deduction for state and local taxes, ending the deduction for student interest loans, calling this middle class and repealing the estate tax, calling it middle class and repealing the AMT. They're asking their members in there to cast a very, very difficult vote.
I would just add to that they are asking the Republicans on this committee, and then perhaps on the floor of the House, to walk the plank on a bill that may not be the final product. They're asking them to reject the concerns of their own constituents. In California, 14 Republicans voted for this tax plan that very seriously hurts the tune of thousands of dollars to tens of thousands of each of their in each of their districts. So when you combine these two questions, this tax bill is a moment of truth for America about what opportunity there can be, who pays the price, and again, the failure of their trickle down that they're trying to sell to the American people, obviously last night unsuccessfully. But these poor victims, the Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee, who are voting this way, to get back to Kate's question, they keep saying if we don't pass this, we won't win the next election. If you do pass it, you're not going to win the next election.
Right.
Both of you comment on whether you view last night's result specifically as a rejection of President Trump.
I think it's pretty obvious that so many people in Virginia were upset with the way President Trump has tried to govern, has been unable to get anything done, has resorted to tweeting instead of leading, that yes, I believe that this was a rejection not only of President Trump, but of the policies that he and the Republican Party seem to be adopting. Get rid of health care, give tax breaks to the rich, cut the kinds of things like transportation and scientific research that people need. It was a rejection both of the president and of his policies, which our Republican colleagues in the House and Senate are blindly following.
One of the best messages from last night, I caucused with the Democrats in the Ways and Means Committee bright and early this morning in anticipation of the markup. You know what, for those of you who really follow this, you know what the best message was last night? that Governor-elect Northam probably couldn't get nominated in New Jersey, and Governor Murphy probably couldn't get nominated in Virginia. But last night they both heralded a big Democratic victory, as did the senators from both states, talked about what a Democratic victory meant last night. And I think that that's the path that we're on.
And that
Last
is
one.
based on democratic values and principles as we go forward.
Yes.
Yesterday, about 12 Senate Democrats met with the Trump administration on tax reform, and they gave them two bills that Sherrod Brown had proposed. It's called the Patriot Employers Tax Act and the Working Families Tax Relief Act. And Trump, who was on the phone with them, said that he liked these bills, and Senator Brown and the others were saying that if he would accept these into the plan, it would go a long way toward getting Democratic votes. And I just wonder if you agree with that assessment.
Well, the sentiment, and I'll turn it over to Ron, who was at the meeting, but the sentiment that was expressed by Senator Brown is a sentiment of all of us. If they'd work with us, we could come up with good proposals. They would focus on the middle class. They would focus on helping working people get better wages. They would focus, one of them is sort of similar to what we're talking about today, that corporations, Sherrod's worked very hard on this along with Senator Durbin, that corporations shouldn't get tax breaks unless they actually put the money to help middle class and working people, not their shareholders and not corporate CEOs. So that sentiment was clear. I'd say another thing here, and Ron can elaborate. My colleagues were sort of shocked at what President Trump said and how far away from reality it was. He said there are no tax breaks for wealthy people in this bill. That's why he had to put the estate tax in. He said a bunch of other things that defied credulity. He's not a very persuasive salesman when he doesn't even know what's in the bills. Ron?
The point of yesterday, and it's in line with the other meeting that we had at the White House, is Senator Brown and Senate Democrats keep coming back to the key point, that we believe you grow the economy around the middle class and red, white, and blue jobs, which is what his legislation is about, is keeping jobs in America. The president, when asked, always says, that's what I'm for. No tax cuts for people like me. Get them to the middle class. Jobs in America. And then what we have said is there sure is a big difference between the president's words and the Republican bills that actually get written down. So the question, and I think an appropriate way, at least for me to wrap up, is after last night, A, and B, after the conciliatory way in which Senate Democrats reacted to the administration and the president, because we kept saying you could get a huge bipartisan vote in the Senate if you did what you said you were going to do and what Sherrod Brown's bills are all about. But so far, there's been a big disconnect between the words the president uses and the legislation that Richie is dealing with in the House and that I may and Senate Democrats be dealing with next week. We believe we're going to be in markup in the Senate next week. So what we're talking about is a bill that could remake the American economy. And as of now, we've not been involved in any of the specifics in terms of getting ready for this legislation. And it seems to me when Sherrod Brown called the question again yesterday, the next step will be, does the president want to do what he says he wants to do and actually put it down on paper that we're going to get a middle class bill and support for growing red, white, and blue jobs in America.
Leader Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I just want to add this to all that has been said, because you started by asking a political question. This election is not, the Democrats in Congress are running to win the majority in Congress. We are running against the policies of the Republicans in Congress. In terms of policy, we're not talking about personality of the president. We're talking about subjects like trickle-down economics, tax breaks for the wealthy at the expense of working families in our country, walking away from the Paris deal, things like that, gun safety, women's right to choose, and the rest. These are issues that the Republicans in Congress have been on for a very long time, in some cases worse than President Trump. So the debate in this next election is, who do you want to represent you in Congress? Do you want checks and balances on the policies of President Trump? I think most Americans do. Democrats offer that alternative. But it's also for better policy, because what is happening in that room, these are not messengers of Donald Trump. These are people representing the views held a long time by the Republicans in Congress. That's what we have to change. Now I yield to Richie. Did you say?
No, I'm ready.
Thank you all
Thank you,
very much.
everybody.
Ronnie?
1 minute.